You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast.
Hello, David.
Hello, Will.
And hello, listeners. Welcome to episode 241 of the Common Descent Podcast, where we like to discuss all sorts of cool natural science and paleontological topics. Today, we're discussing a very relatable one, digestion.
I do it all the time. I'm doing it right now.
Yep. In this topic, we will be discussing what digestion is, the different steps, the different organs that are involved, some of the diversity, some of the diversity, as well as how we're able to study it in the fossil record. Digestion is a very cool concept that we will get a glimpse into the many, many ways organisms get nutrients.
Yeah, this is one of those topics that is fun because you start out with a very personal understanding, a very relatable understanding. Yes, this is how my body does it. And then you can spiral off into all of the fun directions of, well, here's how everybody else does it. Here's a bunch of ways it can vary. Here are the details you might not be familiar with. Here are the definitions. It's one of those very fun topics. There's a lot of depth to this subject.
One of my favorite moments that comes up in these sorts of episodes is the, oh yeah, I guess that does count. And
Yep.
I love when we get to have one of those. You go, oh, right. Yeah, I guess that is part of the list. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of those for digestion.
By the end of this episode, you'll be able to feel your intestines working.
This episode, as all our episodes are, was requested by a bunch of lovely people, including Alex, Aaron, Big Boss Man, Cirque, Nina, Sylvie, Luke, Taterboy, Catherine, and Cheryl.
Thank you, everybody, for this request.
Absolutely. Hope you all enjoy. Before we get into the topic, we have some announcements and then our first section. Our first announcement, as always, is that we have a Patreon. Our Patreon supports the podcast in its entirety. It lets us do all the cool stuff that we get to do. And if you sign up on the Patreon to support us, you can get extra goodies, bonus content, extra episodes, live streams, all sorts of good stuff like that, some merch, but also at certain levels, you can get your name shouted out as we welcome you to the Patreon. So this time we would like to welcome Draconic, the Witch, and Guinevere.
Well, what a lineup. A real medieval lineup of patrons this episode.
I saw those names and I went, yes, thank you. Yes, thank you.
This is an episode of Ice and Fire.
Speaking of some of the cool things we get to do because of the Patreon, we have some awesome stuff happening this month. One of our usual things is that we're back in the time of year where it is silver screen science time. This year we are doing classic dinosaur movies. So going through some of the old examples of dinosaurs in film.
Yeah, by the time this episode is out, the first episode of Silver Screen Science will already be available on our podcast feed, where we discuss the great granddaddy of dinosaur movies, The Lost World, from way back in the 20s.
The Lost World.
The capital T.
Also coming up this month, another thing supported by our patrons, is our next museum meetup.
Yes, this has been, we started doing this last year, hanging out with our listeners at various museums. This year's first museum meetup will be at the McClung Museum in Knoxville, Tennessee, at the campus of University of Tennessee, Knoxville. April 18th, Saturday, we will be meeting up in the museum at 11 a.m. Any of our listeners who are able to show up to join us for any length of this time, please come by. It's super fun just to hang out in a cool science-y environment with a bunch of our listeners. And we know a bunch of people over at the McClung, so hopefully we will get the chance to hang out with some cool people and see some extra cool things.
Yeah, so be there or be well, because I don't think any of our listeners are square.
No, you're all great. Be there or be at the next one. Details for that are up on the website and also on the Discord. And if you think you're going to be coming by, let us know on the Museum Meetups channel on the Discord so that we have an idea of who to expect. Also, speaking of people being very cool, this is our first episode of April, and I believe April is Autism Awareness Month.
Oh, yeah.
So a shout out to all of our lovely listeners who are on the spectrum.
Yes.
Which, given the kind of podcast and content that we produce, is probably a whole lot of them.
Yes, I assume you all are in very good company.
I don't know. I think I have yet to meet a listener of this podcast who isn't neurodivergent in some way or another.
We attract.
Well, yeah, like attracts like. We are all, this is just a little neurospicy community. Shout out to all of our autistic and otherwise, however your brain works. We love having you here in our community.
Absolutely. And that's it for the announcements. Short announcements this time, which means we get to go right into the first section, which is our news. Every episode, we like to gather some recent news in the realms of paleontology and biology and evolutionary sciences so we can all stay up to date. David, what's your first news?
Well, given the topic of this episode, I've got some news to start us off with about ancient marine reptiles and how they were eating things.
Cool.
This is research by Francesco Della Gistina et al. In the journal Paleontology, and on the blog post for this episode, we will put a link to an article by Hannah Shabbat-Wiener in Brighter Side News. Way back in the Cretaceous period of North America, the continent was split down the middle by the Western Interior Seaway. We've talked about this extensively. It's a very famous formation. Episode 71 for lots more details. In the Western Interior Seaway, there was lots and lots of abundant marine life, including numerous species of coexisting large predatory marine reptiles. And that is an intriguing ecosystem setup because it suggests that these big reptiles had landed on ways to coexist. That it is suspected that they were probably eating different things or occupying different sections of their habitats so that they could actually live in the same place.
Yeah, this question comes up when we see environments like this very often in the fossil record because we don't have a lot of examples of ecosystems that have numerous big predators in them today.
Yes. This topic with the ancient seaway marine predators has been investigated by looking at their teeth, their isotopes, right, the chemical structure of their teeth and bones, examples of stomach contents, all of which contribute to this picture of different dietary habits in these different reptiles. This study comes at the same problem from a new angle, looking at and comparing the biomechanics of the jaws of these animals.
Very cool.
So, whereas previous research has been, what are you eating? What are your teeth doing? This is, how do your jaws work? And
Yes.
How is that different between these different groups of reptiles?
Cool.
So they took 3D scans of the skulls of a bunch of different marine reptiles to create high-resolution 3D models. These included 13 species of mosasaurs, the ancient marine lizards, and 3 species of plesiosaurs, which are the long-necked. I'm pretty sure all the ones that they looked at are the long-necked version.
Yeah.
In each of these species, they not only reconstructed the bones of the skull in their 3D model, but used information from muscle scars and the insertion points of muscles, basically where muscles were attaching and sitting up against the bone, leaving evidence in the structure of the bone. They used that to reconstruct the jaw muscles. So this isn't just biomechanics of the bones of the skull, but also the inferred musculature of the jaws.
Nice.
Then they did a biomechanical analysis called fine element analysis, FEA, which is basically just splitting the structure into as many distinct points and pieces as possible. How does it all operate in concert? Looking specifically at how does the skull respond to various stresses during the process of biting. They explored this looking at different angles of the jaw open, like different gape angles of the jaw, as well as different positions along the tooth row to get a fairly comprehensive picture of what happens when this jaw bites down.
Nice. I like that combo of, yeah, are you biting something that has your jaw open wide or something that's
Mhm.
smaller, and where are you biting it in your mouth? That's neat.
Yes. And they found that these reptiles' jaws operate differently. For the plesiosaurs, they found that those jaws were more vulnerable to stress. Or, in a way that they put it in, I think this was in the paper, the bones of the skull tend to absorb most of the energy produced by their bite,
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which means when they bite, they are feeling most of that force in their own jaw, which means that they were almost certainly not taking big, powerful bites of big things. They were
Mhm.
probably focusing on smaller, softer prey. This is consistent with other evidence we have from them, including their slenderer snouts, narrow, thinner teeth. They've got these needle like teeth. And this lines up with stomach contents. So, excellent. We are confirming previous evidence. On the other end of the spectrum were the large mosasaurs. Tylosaurus, Mosasaurus, these were the biggest reptilian predators in these ecosystems. They had much more robust jaws, much more resistant to stress. And part of this seems to be that the area for the attachment of the jaw muscle, like where the muscles adhered to the bone, was a larger area. It wasn't
Yeah.
attaching at like one little point, it was attaching over a large space, which seems to help distribute the stress of
Yes.
that musculature activity.
Cool.
This is consistent with eating much larger prey. Big things, things that need strong bites or powerful grip with the jaws. This is also consistent with other research that these were large macro predators eating big meals, but there was also a bunch of variation within the mosasaurs. Smaller species that had slenderer snouts had bites more like the plesiosaur.
Yep, yep, yep.
So they might have been more in between or eating more similarly to those plesiosaurs, that softer, smaller food. And there was also variation over time.
Mhm, mhm.
Later mosasaurs had stronger jaws. There was a trend over the history of mosasaurs in this seaway towards more powerful, more stress resistant jaws, which might be expansion of this partitioning. It might be a change in the prey, but the way the jaw functioned changed over time.
Cool.
This is all very, this is one of those studies where this hasn't necessarily told us anything surprising, but it is, on the one hand, further supporting conclusions that have been made using other aspects, stomach contents and teeth, but it also provides a methodology that
Mhm,
can
mhm.
be used to interpret the dietary behavior of ancient animals, which, again, as many angles as you can come from is always good, but that could be really helpful in cases where we don't have stomach contents or where we can't get a clear isotope signal or the teeth aren't preserved very well. This is one more tool in the toolkit to help us interpret these ancient behaviors.
Yeah, research like this might seem like, at a cursory glance, a waste of time. It's like, all right, so you looked at the ones that we thought had a strong bite and they had a strong bite, and we looked at
Hmm.
the ones that we thought had a weak bite and they had a weak bite, and the answer was yes to both. So what was the point? And like you said, it confirms, because yeah, if we looked at the big mosasaurs and went, actually, they have really fast, fairly, seemed like they had fast bites, and that's not what we expected. I guess they were hunting in a weird way for such a large animal.
Hmm.
That happens where we go, yeah, all right, we all know what we expect to see. Let's just do the due diligence and test it. Oh, nope, didn't come back as that.
Yes.
But also, as you said, it sets up a methodology very often. And sometimes, like, the researchers will say this in the paper of, yeah, The reason we chose this to do first was because we were pretty sure what the answer was, and we had multiple ways to confirm that our answer made sense. So we're doing it here with the easy one that
Yeah.
has a lot of evidence to support. And if it verifies, if it all lines up, that means this method is a good method, most likely.
Yes.
So when we use it on someone that is more mysterious, we can at least put some decent trust in this new technique.
Yep, absolutely.
Very, very cool. Well, my first news is about ancient marine fish and how they heard stuff.
Ooh, how they heard those big predators coming.
Yes, absolutely. Here I'm coming. This is research on coelacanths, and specifically a structure in fossil coelacanths that's been a little bit mysterious, and or at least debated as to exactly what it was doing for the fish. This is research by Luigi Manueli et al. In Communications Biology, and the article is a press release in phys.org. Coelacanths, we've discussed them before.
Yep, episode 83 was all about coelacanths.
These are around today. They're the famous fish that we rediscovered. We knew them from the fossil record, thought they went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous, and then found out there's still 2 species alive today, both in the genus Latimeria. And the famous thing about this group of fish is they are sarcopterygians, lobe-finned fish, meaning that they are actually more closely related to us tetrapods than they are to other groups of fish. This is the group, sarcopterygians, that tetrapods came from. Not coelacanths, but other lobe-finned fish related to them. Today, coelacanths live deep down in the water. They're fully, marine. They're not climbing out of the water like other lobe-finned fish from the past, and they breathe exclusively with their gills. But ancestral coelacanths, around 240 million year old members, displayed a wider variety of biology and forms, and many of them include what seems to be a lung inside them. And part of the reason we know this so well is because their lung is covered in bony plates arranged like roof tiles.
Yeah. I think this came up in a news a while back, but also I'm pretty sure we talked about this a bunch in episode 218, which was lungs.
Yep. And this has, it's been interpreted as a lung, air breathing, which sounds weird for fish. If you go back to that episode, there's actually a whole bunch of fish that have actual lungs or rudimentary lungs or are using their air bladder as lungs. Like a lot of fish actually breathe air quite frequently. But exactly what this was doing for the fish has been debated. Some research has come back with different options, and 2 of the ones that come up are breathing, but also hearing. Because we do have examples of fish today that use their air bladder as a resonating chamber to be able to pick up underwater sounds. This research looked into this using some more recently discovered coelacanth fossils, 2 Triassic coelacanths from France. They micro-CT scanned them to get a really detailed look at the ossified lung, which is the term that gets used for this structure, both of which had a really well-preserved example of them.
Cool.
With that, they found that there are these wing-like bone structures at the edge of the lung, which seems like that was a new discovery of the bony features of the lung. They also looked at embryos of modern coelacanths, and they found a canal in modern coelacanths connecting the organs of hearing and balance located on either side of the skull. Combining all of this new anatomical information, it suggests that the 2 structures might form a sensory system for detecting sound. That the bony structures of the lung might help to vibrate and transmit sound to the inner ear canal, enabling them to hear sound underwater. Part of the reason that this is interesting and that this is, that these structures are looked into this way is because without something like this, without some resonating chamber and something to pick up sound in the water would just pass through a fish normally because they're about the same density as water. So they would not really be able to feel the sound at all without some sort of air chamber and things to resonate and vibrate off the sound. At this point, though, it's only been detected in these 2 coelacanths. So we don't know that this was a feature of all coelacanths, but the bony lungs were a widespread feature. So There's lots others that we could look into to see if this same evidence shows up. And it appears this feature was gradually lost in the group, likely as the ancestors of our modern coelacanths started to adapt to deeper and deeper water environments, where the breathing aspect of the lung stopped being useful and lowered the selection for it. But, as noted by the canal, there are still some features left behind by this seemingly ancestral hearing system.
Interesting. It's a really fascinating finding. Every now and then we find this where we take a closer look at a particular organ or a particular body part and find that it actually is doing another thing we didn't realize it was doing.
Yes.
And lungs as a hearing organ feels very counterintuitive, but it's a resonating chamber.
Mm-hmm.
And transfer, we use our lungs to help us with vocalizing,
yes,
with
to make
making
noise.
sounds. And so the using of using lungs as part of that system to receive noises is especially because that would partially explain why they have those bony plates around the lungs.
Yes.
Which has been a mystery in the past. And I think the running suggestion, like the main hypothesis, is that it helps provide structure for the lung.
Yeah.
Right? It's an extra bit of defense and an extra bit of physical structure, especially if you're diving deep down where the lungs are going to be under a lot of pressure. But once they're there, bones vibrate. Loose bones are going to vibrate like the ones in our inner ear. So using them also to transmit vibrations is a really interesting possibility.
And it would be neat to look into or see if there's any way for us to determine which came first, because there's fish that use their gas bladder, their air bladder, to pick up sound today, and they aren't covered in bones. The gas bladder is not bony. So you can do this without those bones, but do those bones increase the effectiveness like our ear bones do to make it more precise? So were they structural things that then got co-opted for hearing, or were they already listening to things with their lung and then refined it with these bones?
Yeah. Fascinating. Coelacanths are just full of cool surprises.
They're so awesome.
They're very cool fish. Episode 83. Go check it out. Well, sticking to the ancient oceans, my next bit of news is about arguably maybe the oldest claws in the fossil record, kind of depending on what you count as a claw, but more specifically, new insights into the origins of chelicerates, the group that includes arachnids and their relatives. This is research published in the journal Nature by Rudy LaRossi Aubril and Javier Ortega Hernandez, and we'll link in the blog post to a press release on Science Daily from Harvard University. Chelicerates are a massive group of arthropods, right? Exoskeleton buggy things. There's over 120,000 living species in this group. This group includes horseshoe crabs, sea spiders, and arachnids. Arachnids being spiders, scorpions, mites, all of those. Chelicerates are a lot of our creepy crawlies today.
Yeah.
One of the defining features of this group, and the feature from which it gets its name, are structures called chelicerae, which are a first pair of appendages that end in a little pincer. Perhaps the most obvious example of this is things like scorpions, who have those big pincers, but spiders have this, horseshoe crabs have this. It is their first, right? They've got a row of legs, and then they've got this first pair of leg-like appendages that end in a little pincer.
Like a lot of spiders, they've become super specialized where they no longer look like what you would expect a pincer to look like. But it evolved from pinchers.
Yes. These are typically also feeding appendages. They're used for grabbing onto stuff and moving it toward the mouth. The oldest known members of this group, the chelicerates, are from the early Ordovician, about 480 million years ago, but it has long been suspected that the group got started earlier than that in the Cambrian. And there have been a lot of fossils from the Cambrian that have been suggested as this might be a chelicerate. It looks like it might be a chelicerate, but one of the reasons why it has never been definitive is because there has never been a confirmed finding of a fossil chelicera, the actual appendage that defines the group from the Cambrian. Until now. This paper describes a new genus and species named Megachelicerax custoi, named after Jacques Cousteau.
Man, I love Megachelicerax. When he fought Godzilla in whatever movie it was like.
came up from the ocean and had these big pincers. Megachelicerax comes from the Middle Cambrian of Utah, so about 500 million years old, 20 million years older than the previous, for sure, chelicerates. It was excavated back around 1980 by 1981, but more recently prepped and analyzed, giving rise to this study. It is a very well-preserved fossil specimen, like we often get in Cambrian sites. It is around 8 centimeters in total length, which is pretty darn big for the Cambrian period.
Yeah, not bad.
Mostly soft-bodied, and preserves a very distinctive body structure. The preserved exoskeleton shows a big head shield, kind of like the front of a horseshoe crab, and then a body with 9 segments. So overall, it is sort of horseshoe crab shaped. It's not quite a horseshoe crab, but like from the top, it looks pretty horseshoe crab-y.
Yeah, just a little more sectioned.
Yes. On the underside, they also have respiratory structures preserved that are similar to the book gills that we see in animals like horseshoe crabs, and limbs. On the head, the fossil preserves 6 pairs of limbs, 5 of which appear to be probably legs, like locomotory appendages, but the first pair, the frontmost pair, are large, 3-segmented, so kind of like our fingers, and they end in little claws.
Cool.
These are the oldest known chelicerae in the fossil record, these clawed appendages.
First pinch.
These were the first pinchers. These are the first ones that could pinch. I started at the very beginning, I was like, the first claws, and I was like, that's almost certainly not true. For sure there were other pincers and claws and things in the Cambrian, but this is chelicerae claws.
Cool.
This is extremely cool. Besides being a record, it confirms that chelicerates did in fact originate within the Cambrian. We now have for sure they were back there. It also confirms that there were large chelicerae bearing predators in the Cambrian. Not only did they have these claws, they were big and using them for eating relatively large prey. It also shows that 2 of the defining features of this group of arthropods showed up way early on. The clawed appendages, but also the head-body division. That 2-part body that we think, right? This is when you're a little kid, you learn this is what makes spiders not insects.
Yes.
Is that their body is 2 segments, head and body. This is also head and body. This is a very ancient body structure. Phylogenetic analysis comparing Megachelicerax to others confirms it as an early member of the chelicerate lineage, and confirms a couple of other Cambrian fossils as close relatives.
Awesome.
So we had a bunch of these other fossils that were like they look like they might be related to the chelicerates. Having this early member allows us to fill in that bridge.
Yes.
To compare and go, yes, actually, these guys are very closely related to this. So this is a cool new species that resolves a bunch of open questions about early chelicerate evolution.
Very nice. That's so satisfying that when we finally got the piece we've been missing, it went, all right. Well, it's like when you're playing a game and like Hangman or something like that, or some puzzle game, and you're like, I just don't know, or crossword. That's a great one, crossword. And I'm so stuck, and wait, I figured out what 11 down is, and it crosses 8 others. Now I can figure out 4 of those immediately because I was stuck on 2 possible answers, and this'll like it
Yep.
falls into place once we have the little bit of missing data. It's also very cool, and this happens a lot when we look at the ancestry of lineages, that like evolution can do crazy things, but it's still often very conservative because it's building off of the same body plan. That like, yeah, the claws are there, the head body segment. If you ever like look up videos or images of what baby spiders look like while they're developing in the egg, they start out much more multi-sectioned in their back part.
Mhm.
Like this, they start out with this kind of body shape and then turn into a spider. And it's very cool when we get to see ancestors, and it's like, oh yeah, no, I get it. I get
Yep.
how you count because I can see all the clues, and that's very awesome. Well, to stay on theme, evidently, let's stay in the ocean some more.
Are we having another wet summer?
Yep, yep. We're going to talk about cephalopods and the evolutionary history, specifically of the decapodiforms, the squid and cuttlefish side of things.
Ooh. Always happy to talk about cephalopods.
Right. This is research by Gustavo Sanchez et al. In Nature, Ecology, and Evolution. And this is another press release in phys.org. So decapodiform cephalopods are your 10-limbed cephalopods. This includes squid, cuttlefish, things like the ram's horn squid. These have 10 arms because they have the 8 arms that an octopus has, but then also feeder tendrils that can be used. These are super diverse. They live in a bunch of different habitats, from deep sea to coastal waters. They're also notable among cephalopods for being the members that still have remnants of internal shells.
Mm-hmm.
The cuttlefish have the cuttle bone, which is a calcium part. A lot of your oceanic and coastal squids have a piece of cartilage that runs down the body. The ram's horn squid is named that because it has a little spiral shell inside its mantle that looks like a little ram's horn. This is one of the few characteristics that link the groups. They're very different in many other respects. So it's been one of the things people have looked at to try to figure out exactly what the evolutionary history and relations and everything are. But it's been difficult to figure out the exact pattern of evolution of this group because their fossil record is not very good. They're soft-bodied animals. And even though some of them have internal shells, those aren't always going to fossilize, and they're not always going to give us a ton of info, which means that the best way to study their evolutionary history is genome studies, studying their genetics, their entire genomes, and comparing them. But those are also limited because, evidently, most cuttlefish and squid genomes are very large and difficult to sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Often bigger than ours, up to twice the size of the human genome. So takes some effort, takes some major computing power to do it, and you need fresh DNA to do it, which can be difficult for open ocean and deep sea species.
Yeah. There's a lot of distance between their habitat and the lab.
Yes. So this research is a culmination of a lot of work to collect more genomes of these cephalopods. A project called the Aquatic Symbiosis Genomics Project is aiming to sequence many marine genomes, not just cephalopods, but a branch of it has been focused on cephalopods. And so for the last several years, they've been trying to fill a lot of the gaps. And due to a lot of cooperation from many organizations to get hard to reach species, and just from, they said, some lucky finds close to the research area, they've gotten some more genomes. So this study wanted to combine 3 new high quality genome sequences as well as the previously existing genomes to do a phylogenomic approach to their evolution, to look at their evolution and relatedness based off of our total genome knowledge of this group. They also used transcriptomics, which is a specific aspect of studying their genes, to look at the biomineralization and regeneration of shells to try to follow that feature across the group. They also included the fossil data we have. All this together allowed them to get a first of its kind phylogenetic family tree of decapodiform cephalopods. And what they found is pretty interesting. First, it supports a separate grouping of open ocean lineages and coastal and shallow water lineages, that those do seem to be distinct related groups. They also found that the group seems to have originated in the deep ocean, so deeper water, and that the first split apart and diversified rapidly around 100 million years ago in the mid Cretaceous, which is consistent with the fossil data we have so far, and that they remained deep water animals through the end Cretaceous, which is potentially one of the reasons they survived that mass extinction, because the deep water ecosystems would have had areas still with high enough oxygen to sustain them, while shallower waters were experiencing very low oxygen and ocean acidification, which would have been damaging to their shells. And then after the KPG, as coral reefs rebuilt coastlines, we see that they started to move into shallower waters. And then during the post KPG extinction rebound of environments, that's when we see them diversify rapidly again.
Interesting.
And they called this model a long fuse, where we see them show up and then they kind of don't diversify from their origin to the end of the Cretaceous. They kind of just are hanging around, and then they diversify much later into their history. And so, yeah, this has given us a very new look into the potential evolutionary history of this group.
One of the things that it becomes easy to forget when you're looking at evolutionary biology from sort of the big zoomed out perspective is that every lineage has its own pattern and trajectory over time. And that just because we have evidence for a group existing at a certain time in the past doesn't mean that they were diverse back then or particularly successful or similar to what they are now. And the reminder that you can have a group that just kind of is a relatively rare, relatively low diversity, deep ocean bunch of invertebrates for a long time. And then when the right opportunity comes along, they diversify and become extremely abundant. It's a very cool story to get insights into.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it's another one of those examples of, if you were snorkeling along the shorelines in Cretaceous, you wouldn't be coming across cuttlefish, and you wouldn't be coming across schools of squid and stuff, because they weren't hanging out in the shallows yet.
Yeah, even though we have them in the fossil record because they were around at that time, but they might not have been in the habitats you would expect them to be in based on today.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Very cool stuff.
And with that, we can wrap up the news and move into the main topic of the episode. After a short break, we'll start by discussing what is digestion and how does it happen, starting with us. Digestion is another one of those classic examples of a topic where the premise is pretty straightforward and simple, and the examples are so ridiculously numerous and diverse and complicated that we will really only be just dipping a pinky toe into the realm of digestion.
Yeah, this is one of those fundamental aspects of life.
Yeah.
It's like respiration. Yes,
exactly.
there is a simple one sentence description of it, and then there's textbooks.
Really, when you think about it, this is for many the other side of the coin of respiration. This is how you get a lot of the stuff that you're going to be respirating with.
Yes.
So, simply put, digestion is the means by which life breaks down complex structures into simple structures so that our cells can uptake nutrients.
Yes. Yeah, the structures in this case being like molecules, proteins, the things out in the world that are made of the ingredients that we need to run our bodies.
Exactly. Cells need proteins, fats, carbohydrates, amino acids, vitamins, minerals, water, all of those nutrients, the things that you'll see described or talked about in what makes up different parts of our food, but a cell cannot take a sugar molecule and do much with it usually. That's too big, too complex, sometimes too tough for a cell to handle. And ultimately, we need, like us complex organisms, but also all other organisms, you need that nutrients to get to your cells, to get into the cells so that each of our cells can be powered and kept alive. So digestion is the both physical and chemical process of breaking sugars and meat and vegetation down into these component small bits that then can be uptaken by our body and by our cells. Some of the general categories of things that are being broken down: proteins get broken down into amino acids, fats break down into fatty acids and glycerol, and carbohydrates, which are sugars and stuff and things like that, and starches break down into simple sugars, so
Mhm.
the non-complex version. Generally, basically all of your kinds of digestion are going to have 5 basic categories of steps, of phases, so to speak. One is ingestion, taking the food into the body or taking the food into your control, because some of them don't take it into their body.
Mhm.
Digestion, breaking the food down, which itself can have many, many steps depending on how complex a digestive system we're dealing with. Absorption, soaking up those nutrients you just made available. Assimilation, making the food part of the cell, so getting it to the cells. And then eventually, elimination, getting rid of the waste, the unused food parts.
Yes. This is one of those really, when we talk about digestion with ourselves, we have a whole digestive tract, right?
Yes.
There's multiple organs are involved. It's a whole body experience. There's a lot going on. But a individual cell also does digestion.
Exactly. Yes.
And so we are like I said, but we're talking about a fundamental life process, which is there's so much variety in the different forms that it could take.
Yeah, an amoeba, when it wraps around something, is going to go through those stages. Same as a sponge, as an anemone, as a fish, as an insect, as a reptile, mammal, or bird. Just the mechanisms being used to do the digestion and the level of complexity of the process is going to
Mhm.
be what's changing. And that's going to be changing both because of the kind of organism you're dealing with. An amoeba doesn't need to have a bunch of fancy teeth and stomachs and stuff because they're eating one cell at a time, and they can handle that with just their chemical process and the physical process of wrapping around another cell, which we will talk about because that's an important part of some other digestions. But then something like us is going to need to break down larger food, which is more complex, and then also you're going to have different digestion depending on what's being digested. We cannot
Mm.
handle hard grass, while another animal is not going to do so great with a mostly meat diet because we have different systems going on. To do a brief intro to kind of what the different parts of a digestive system are, and this is going to be vertebrate biased, both because it's our most familiar and we know by far the most about it.
Sure. Well, and also that's where the a lot of the interesting complexity comes in.
Yes,
Not to
absolutely.
diminish what microbes are doing, but yeah, you absorb some food and then you get rid of the waste. It's the same
Yes.
kind of process, just on a much smaller scale.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of groups out there that we don't actually know a ton about the details of their digestion. We know the
Yeah.
general process, but we don't actually know it intimately. We know ours ridiculously intimately because it's also an incredibly important health aspect.
Mhm.
Digestion, without it, you stop being a human because you become a corpse.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, and it's such a detailed and complex system that there's lots of ways for it to go wrong.
oh, yeah.
And most of us are very familiar with at least some of those ways.
So, for this first section, we're going to focus on the human digestive tract just to give a roadmap, and then we'll be able to reference back to that as we go and view others that are a bit different. There are two main aspects of our digestive system: the gastrointestinal tract, or the GI tract, and the biliary tract. The biliary tract is not actually part of the intestines the way we think of it. The GI tract is our mouth, throat, stomach, small, large intestines, and then a rectum and anus and everything.
Right. It's where the food goes. Like it's the
Yes.
road that the food takes.
The tube that connects our mouth to our butt, that's the GI tract. The biliary tract is a support system for our digestive process. It's going to include the liver and pancreas and their supporting players like bile ducts and stuff. The liver, which is on the right side of your body under your ribs, in case you're wanting to like picture where all this stuff is, because we're basically going to do a roadmap of our guts. It makes bile, which is a digestive juice. It helps digest fats and vitamins. And this is transferred to the small intestine and to the gallbladder, which acts as a storage unit. So the gallbladder holds onto bile, and then it will also send bile to the small intestines to help break things down. The pancreas, which is in front of your spine, also on the right side of the body, behind the stomach, and it makes digestive juices, enzymes that break down carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, and it also delivers these to the small intestine.
Yeah.
The GI tract is the main show for most vertebrates, for most bony animals, and even a lot of invertebrates. This is the system by which us animals that have a inside and outside of the body are using to eat things.
Yes. When Miss Frizzle's class tours the digestive system, this is the place that it goes through.
Absolutely. It is very complex set of organs and is extensive. Famously, fun fact, but if we stretched out our intestines, it would be about 30 feet long or 9 meters. And they are all coiled up in our lower abdomen, the belly. It's often broken up into the foregut, midgut, and hindgut, with foregut being your mouth and throat and stomach, going to the first section of the small intestines. The midgut being the small intestines and the start of your colon, which is getting into the large intestines. And then the hindgut, which is the rest of your large intestines and the exit. Part of the reason that they're grouped differently, I found out, is because they have different blood supplies.
Oh, interesting. They're like different watersheds of the body.
Yeah. So there
cool.
There is some distinct sectioning there. Each part is going to have a slightly different step in the digestive process and are moving the food through, breaking the food down, or absorbing nutrients. It's going to be doing one of those 3 steps to some degree. Generally, food is moved through our digestive tract via peristalsis.
Yeah. Squeezing.
Yes. The tubes of our body squeeze behind the food to push it forward and relax in front of the food to allow it to move. And it's just that undulating muscle, and our intestines have coils of muscle around them that allow them to flex and move. The first stop on our GI tract is the mouth. Mouth is the beginning of digestion, not only because it's where food enters, but it's also where we start to process food, both physically and chemically. Chewing is physical breakdown of food matter, and the saliva is starting the chemical process. It's also there to just lubricate, to help it be swallowed, to make it easier so that you're not swallowing dry chunks of food, which would be very uncomfortable. But it also starts to help break down starches. The esophagus, our throat, is an interesting one because it's purely transport. There is no chemical process happening inside the throat. It is just moving the food from mouth to stomach.
Because we've got these necks.
Fun fact that many of you have probably noticed, but once it starts swallowing, the process is automatic. The peristalsis is underway, and you can do it upside down, both due to the peristalsis moving things in a constant direction, and there is a sphincter at the bottom of our throat and the top of the stomach that keeps anything from backwashing back into the throat from the stomach.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in our body to make sure that food is moving the right direction consistently.
Yes.
Which is part of why it's so uncomfortable when it does go the opposite direction.
Yep.
Which is also a process in the body.
Yes.
Much like once you've started swallowing something, once it gets past a certain point, you're not getting it back.
Yep.
Right? Like the body, the automatic process takes over. But you will also be familiar with the feeling of being unable to stop yourself from regurgitating something.
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
that's also just a switch that your body can flip that goes, hey, this thing, absolutely not, get it out of here. And past a certain point, you don't get a choice in that anymore.
Yep. It's no fun, but it's an
No.
important survival mechanism. The stomach is I think that's what our star of the show is in a lot of people's minds, even
Mhm.
though it is actually not like necessarily the main player, but it is critical. It's where a bunch of the main breaking down happens in regards to dissolving the food. It is full of stomach acid, as well as enzymes and things to help the process and the reaction go on. The stomach is also muscular and can massage and move the food to churn things and to keep things reacting. The content of your stomach is called chyme, CHYME.
Yes, I think it might be chyme,
Chyme. Yeah.
but your mileage may vary.
Yes. Chyme. Main things broken down here are proteins. This is breaking down structural proteins and things like that. This is then emptied into the small intestines, which I would argue is actually the star of the digestive show when it comes to us and most other vertebrates.
Yeah.
Small intestines is 22 feet of tubing wrapped up in our body. So it's by far the most voluminous portion of our digestive tract, and it is doing a bunch of the breaking down and almost all of the absorbing of nutrients.
Yeah. Where the body is starting to take up those essential nutrients to
Yes.
deliver them to where they're needed.
You don't actually get any nutrients from your stomach. It's not absorbing anything. It's purely just breaking down. The small intestine is doing both. It absorbs the rendered nutrients through its intestinal lining and into the bloodstream, where then it can be taken where it needs to go. It also makes its own digestive juices and gets the bile and pancreatic digestive enzymes, and all those work together to break down proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. So it's breaking down everything, and it's also soaking things up. There's also a bunch of bacteria in our small intestine that we've talked about before, our endosymbionts, our microbiome inside our body that help break down a whole bunch of things.
That are doing their own digestion.
Yep. And it will pull water from your bloodstream to help break down food. And this is ironic to me because then the next step after the small intestines is the large intestines, which soaks that water back up.
Yes. Well, we need it. You can't be wasting water.
Yep. So the large intestine is the last portion. It includes the appendix, cecum, colon, and rectum.
Mm-hmm.
It's doing a little bit of breakdown, but mostly not the large intestine itself, but there is bacteria in there still working on breaking some things down, some last remaining nutrients. They're also important for evidently making vitamin K, which I don't know anything about vitamin K, but there's bacteria in there doing that job. Mainly, it's absorbing water, drying out the waste material that is left over from digestion, and then collecting those and squeezing those into feces.
Yes.
Like this is what becomes poop, is the dried out leftover bits.
Mm-hmm.
And the large intestine's job is to facilitate that process.
Yeah, to refine it.
Yep. The nutrients we gets delivered throughout the body to the cells, but it also can get sent to specific places to be distributed or stored. The liver, for instance, stores and processes things like simple sugars, amino acids, glycerol, some vitamins and salts. Lymph system, which is part of our immune system that runs under our skin, it delivers things like white blood cells to areas of our body. It absorbs fatty acids and other vitamins. And then, of course, we have like fat cells for fat storage that are deposited throughout the body.
This is why I feel like the most consistent analogy that I've seen in cartoons and stuff for the process of our digestive system is like a manufacturing line in a factory, because it really does feel that way, right?
Yes.
It goes through the different stages. We're extracting stuff, we're delivering stuff where it needs to go. It feels like an industrial complex.
Absolutely. Like you can hear the how it's made narrated, and the food now moves down the conveyor belt to the
Yes.
next section. Yeah, because that's exactly it. That each step is doing some process that readies it for the next step. And
Yes.
it's a continually reductive process. Each step you go along, it becomes less food and more just nutrients to be used.
I think that there's also, you mentioned the fun fact of how long our digestive system actually is, and our small intestine being 20 plus feet of intestine. And I think that beyond just being a fun fact, what that really drives home for me is just how much work digestion
Yeah.
is. Because the
Yep.
reason you have that, right? The reason that you make an extraordinarily long tube is for surface area.
Yes.
It's to have as much space and room for glandular activity and absorption and all that. Every bit of food travels through 20 feet of that space just to get the absolute most work done. And
Absolutely.
it's not like it goes in and then it just sits in one place. It's on a very long journey, and it takes that journey to get through all the processing that needs to be done.
Yeah, and this can take a matter of hours to better part or over a day for us for
Mhm.
something to be fully digested. And then for other organisms, it can be much longer if they have slower digestion or they're digesting tougher stuff.
Yeah.
Another note, which doesn't get, I don't think gets thought of as much, is how do we control? How does our body manage digestion? And we have systems for monitoring and managing the processes. Our digestive
Mhm.
system is not just on at all times, it activates. One cool example of that I found is that evidently the stomach is, it's very elastic, as we've all experienced after a big holiday meal. And evidently the volumes it can shift between is when empty, it can be have a volume about 1/5 of a cup, so like a measuring cup,
Mhm.
and expand up to more than 8 cups worth of volume after a large meal.
Wow. Like the
Yeah.
Grinch.
Yes. Yep.
Stomach I feel like I've experienced 8 cups worth of stomach.
Surely I have. Things like that, the stretching of the digestive tract can be picked up by nerves. We have a really extensive nerve system in our gastrointestinal tract. The enteric nervous system, or ENS, is a whole bunch of nerves running throughout the GI tract, comprising 100 million neurons. And at least one paper I found said so extensive that some scientists have called it our second brain. It can sense the stretching of the walls and the strain from food being put in, and that can trigger it to say, all right, speed up movement or slow down movement or increase production of enzymes, things like that. It also triggers the movement of the muscles for peristalsis. We also have a whole bunch of hormones that are being activated by cells and by our systems that control the release and production of digestive juices.
Mhm.
There's also a bunch of communicating going on between the microbiome. The microbes of our digestive tract are communicating through neurotransmitters, which are chemical messaging systems that microbes use, single cells use. And they're noted for having over 30 of these that they're using. And they're evidently really important for producing certain things like serotonin, which is the happy chemical, the brain chemical.
Mhm.
95% is what I found in one thing of serotonin. So like they're really, really important for some of our key chemicals that we're using. So that's the basics on our digestive system. This is more or less what you're going to find in most other mammals, and a lot of other vertebrates and reptiles and birds are going to have a similar setup of at
Mhm.
least mouth, throat, stomach, small, large intestine to some degree, with different features, with different add-ons, with different upgrades, with different things going on
Yeah.
compared to us.
We've talked about, this has come up in a bunch of different episodes where like birds have a gizzard, which is their sort of
Yes.
special structure that modifies their digestion. You've got things like cows and other big herbivores that have extra chambers or that are concentrating the digestion in different parts of the system. There's
Absolutely.
all sorts of like tweaks and adjustments that you can make to this system.
And that was one of the examples I wanted to talk about was fore and fermentation
Yeah.
because it's such a great way to demonstrate the layout we just looked at and how they can be specialized and those different sections used differently. Plant eaters have to process plants, which is a tough ask. That
Yes.
that's real tough. Plants are made to be sturdy and they don't want to be digested. They have cell walls. It's hard to break them down.
Episode 173 for herbivory.
The key way most herbivores handle that is by having microbes in their digestive system that can break down cellulose. And the very common process that this ends up being is fermentation. So, the same way that we brew alcohol by letting yeast and things react and cause gases, they are allowing that to happen in their gut. The bacteria are eating on the plants and breaking it down, and they're producing gases and they are fermenting the plant. To do this, you need some large body cavities to make
Mhm.
room for all those bacteria and that gas they're going to produce, and where the plants can sit for long periods, slowly breaking down.
Yeah, that this is different from what I hinted at just a little while ago.
Mhm.
That like, yeah, our food isn't just sitting in one spot for a long time. In these animals, it is. You've just
Yeah.
got a vat
Yes.
inside where fermentation is happening.
The famous version of that is cows and relatives, cows and friends, the ruminants.
Hmm.
They have a specialized multi-chamber stomach. This is the famous fact that you'll often hear of cows having multiple stomachs,
Hmm.
which isn't accurate. It's not that they have multiplied their stomachs. Their stomachs have pockets and chambers and categories that allow them to move plants through it at different stages in the fermentation process while still giving them a vat to ferment in each step.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like they've divided the stomach up into sub steps.
Yes. And this is a very efficient way to eat plants. It allows them to thoroughly digest the plants with these fermentation chambers. It also allows them to chew the cud, which is to regurgitate some partially digested material and chew it again now that it's a little softer, a little looser, and break
Hmm.
it down physically some more. The main paunch is the rumen, which is where they get their name ruminants and is the primary site of fermentation. This type of digestion is mostly known from these hooved animals, goats, cows, things like that. There are some others that have developed similar systems, specifically the Houtson, the South American herbivorous bird, one of the coolest birds in the world because their babies are also the ones born with wing claws to help them climb around the branches. They're herbivorous. They're eating leaves and things like that. And they have specialized their crop. They have an enlarged crop, which is a throat pouch that birds use to collect food into a rumen like structure to
Yeah.
ferment the plant material. Hindgut fermenters are the other classic option, which are going to be things like horses, rabbits, most rodents.
Hmm.
This is by far the more common one you see, and it's not quite as specialized and it's not as efficient. They instead do their fermentation in the large intestines. They have large areas in the cecum, a large cecum that allows for the same kind of fermentation that's happening in the rumen in the cow's stomach, but you run into a couple of issues. The large intestine is not as specialized for breaking things down as the stomach is. So chemically, it's not quite as effective. And even when you do break things down, you've passed most of the digestive tract by that point.
Hmm.
So you aren't going to be as efficient at absorbing what you can break down. So famously, this is a less efficient, and I've seen lots of things that flippantly will be like, and then there's the dumb way to do it, the Hindgut fermenters,
Right.
who are doing it backwards and bad. But many of them have addressed this issue by just eating it a second time.
Yeah. Yeah, they're basically doing the same thing that cows are achieving by chewing the cud, right?
Yes.
You're putting it back through a part of the process, but they put it through the whole process twice.
Yes, absolutely. So rabbits are famous for this, for eating their droppings to
Hmm.
redigest it. Koalas are known to actually produce a specific kind of droppings called fecal pap for their young, which helps them
Yeah.
to digest it, but also gives them the gut bacteria that they're going to need. And so that's another
Yes.
thing that this can help with, is to bolster the microbiome with some already fresh microbiome.
Yeah. This is another one of those really common uses for the digestive system, which is to do some digesting, not to make it easier for your body to take in those nutrients, but to then make it easier for somebody else's body to take in those nutrients. As
Yes.
in the case with koalas, yeah, I digested this, so now my baby with their underdeveloped digestive system doesn't have to work very hard.
Exactly. You'll also see lots of differences. You'll hear people talk about the famous examples like the panda bear, of animals having a carnivorous digestive tract versus a herbivorous digestive tract. And
Hmm.
this is often what we're talking about, is if you don't have sections for the plants to sit and digest, that suggests you're not going to be very good at digesting plants. It's why we're not particularly great at digesting plants.
Yep.
If we don't cook plants, we get a lot less out of them, because our system just can't handle roughage like that.
Yeah. It's also one of the reasons why herbivores, especially large herbivores, tend to have a shape to them.
Yes.
Like when we think, like if you think about a horse versus a tiger, like herbivores tend to be more barrel chested. They've got more of that big gut. That's space for all of that digesting that they're going to be doing. Whereas a
Exactly.
tiger, it's nice for a tiger to be more streamlined because they actually have to go and take down their food, but they also
Mhm.
don't need all of that internal space for digestion.
Yeah, you don't want meat to sit in your digestive tract for long periods,
No,
because it
that's
can
a
go
problem.
rancid.
Yes.
Yes, that can be incredibly dangerous. This is actually one of the things that often kills things like alligators and
Yeah.
reptiles in human care, is they eat something when it's a little too cold and their digestive system can't handle it, and it just sits and rots in their stomach.
Hmm.
Another example of like difference between diet that I found was one that looked at fish, and it looked at carnivorous, herbivorous, plankton eater, and omnivorous fish. And they looked at different features of the digestive tract, and they found some cool patterns. One was the microvilli and branching, so the complexity of the interior surface of the digestive system, how well it's going to be at absorbing and all that stuff, and found that carnivorous fish had the most complex structures, and then next was herbivorous, and then plankton eaters, and then omnivorous.
Oh, interesting.
But when it came to their microbiome, the microbes inside their gut, omnivorous fish had the highest degree of diversity, and then herbivorous, and then plankton eaters, and then carnivorous.
That makes sense because
Yeah.
your microbes need to be able to handle a whole variety of food if you're omnivorous.
And that's another thing that there's a whole bunch of research that goes into, is what are your gut bugs doing? Show me your
Yeah.
gut bugs, and that will tell me what you're digesting, because a whole bunch of the heavy lifting of breaking things down is done by bacteria and such in our stomach and in our intestines.
Yes.
So if we can get a sample of that population, I can go, oh, cool. So you can break down this, you're breaking down this, you're breaking down this. Noted. Now, these have all been pretty standard, and, according to us humans, digestive systems.
Yes. Very familiar structures.
Yes. And even inside like an insect, you're going to see a very similar pattern. Not the exact same structures, because we are quite distantly related, but a tube going through the body with sections for different steps of digestion.
Hmm.
Not all animals are working with that system. Some of them are much more simplified and function in a much more unusual way as we're used to. One of my favorite examples is the sea stars, echinoderms. Sea stars famously have their mouth on the bottom in the center of their body. They do not actually use that mouth to process or grab food or anything. It is just the opening to the digestive tract. So this is a mouth in name and simple function, not actually one they're doing any chewing, biting, or anything with.
Yeah. It's more of a door.
It's a door. It is the orifice that starts the digestive system.
Yeah. It's like the doors, the Star Wars doors that go whoosh, and they like
Yes, yep.
spiral open and spiral closed.
And like some echinoderms, like sea urchins, have chewing mouth parts that they are biting and chewing and processing with. Sea stars do not. They have their mouth, a very short esophagus, very short throat that connects to the stomach. And the stomach has two portions, a cardinal portion and a smaller pyloric portion. The cardinal stomach is glandular and pouched. It's the part doing the juices and the digesting. That's what glandular means. It has glands. And then the pyloric stomach extends actually into the arms to increase the surface area and the digestive process. And this then connects to a very short intestine. So they have almost no intestines after the stomach. It's almost all stomach. And this connects to their rectum, which is on their top. The mouth's on the bottom, the butt's on the top.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, next time you get to pet sea stars at an aquarium, just be
That's the
careful
butt.
how close to the middle you're going.
Well, you touch the butt.
Some primitive sea stars prey by just swallowing food whole and digesting it and then processing it out. And then they spit out the hard materials like shells that they might be eating. But more advanced sea stars, and the more famous way that they eat, is that instead of taking things into the body, they evert their stomach outside the body to engulf the food item.
Yeah. Like a net. The
Yes.
stomach comes out and grabs the food.
They can use this for, like, if you give them a piece of fish and you watch them eat, they will inflate the stomach from the inside around the piece and just make a bag around the fish outside the body, digest it, and then pull those juices in before pulling the stomach in. This also allows them to hunt things in specific ways. Famously, they will hunt mollusks, things like clams and oysters and such. They use their suction cuppy tube feet to grab both sides of the shell, which aren't actually suction cups, but they look like them, to grab onto both sides of the shell and then just apply constant pressure until they tire out the muscle of the bivalve. And once they get it open just a crack, evidently they only need a fraction of a millimeter to be able to insert their stomach inside the shell and just digest the clam or oyster or whatever it is inside its own shell. And then they just leave behind perfectly clean shells. If you've ever seen them after they eat, it looks like a shell that has been in the waves and polished clean. It's so clean.
Ooh, this is like a much more horrifying version of that dropout, make some noise skit with the pistachio.
Yeah, yep, yep.
Now, here's a question. So we've talked, there is another category, maybe you'll bring this up later, but there is another dichotomy when it comes to digestion of internal and external digestion.
Yes.
Right. And our digestion is pretty much 100% internal. All of our body's digestion is being done inside, but you have famous things like spiders.
Yes.
Which will release juices or inject juices, which starts the breakdown of their food before they actually suck it up. That's external. Fungi do their digestion externally. Arguably, cooking is a form of external digestion that we do. Does it count as external digestion for these sea stars? Because it is kind of outside the body, but it's still inside of their stomach.
Yeah, I brought my inside to you.
Yeah. So I honestly don't know if that counts as external or internal digestion.
This is one of those blur, because usually it's a very easy of like a housefly, which spits juices onto a thing. It melts into a puddle of nutritious soup, and then they sponge it up with their little telescopy mouth part. And that's very clearly like, you digested it and then slurped up what was digested. Easy. Yes. This is, kind of weird. Well, it's, it's inside the clam shell.
Sure. It's a bag inside of a shell.
So it's very, and watching them do it, it's like they're blowing a big bubble, because they're inflating the ends from the inside of their body to expand the stomach out. And they're just blowing this big bubbly bag around the food item. It's very weird. Another great sea animal example that is yet another dichotomy of digestion. All the examples we've talked about so far have a beginning and an end that are different openings. The
Yes.
mouth, the rectum, and or the anus specifically, but those two ends to the digestive tract. But there are many animals that don't have two openings. They have a single opening digestive system, what is sometimes I've seen called a two-way digestive system. Because
Mhm.
ours, the food is always moving in the same direction unless you're sick, unless you are regurgitating. It's always going the same way, farther from the mouth, closer toward the end, one direction. Things like anemones have a digestive system, which is basically just a bag with
Mhm.
a mouth anus at the top. That is both structures. It is where the food enters and where the waste leaves. And their system, they don't have any tubes, they don't have any chambers, they have a bag.
Yes. Food goes in, gets digested, and then the waste just gets spit right back out.
And this is interesting because it leads to a couple of challenges.
Your mouth stinks.
Yeah, right. Your breath. People are always making comments. You're sick and tired of using mints. This structure has to do multiple jobs. For anemones specifically, it's not only digestion, but it's also having to do all of the job of absorbing the nutrients. So it has to break down, absorb, and excrete waste. It also is important for exchanging gases from the water
Mhm.
and providing structure because it's most of the inside of their body, and their body's pretty
Yeah.
simple. So I saw it described as the equivalent of multiple human organs all being done by this one bag. And it can't do them in the same enclosed system because it's not fully enclosed. It's often open to the seawater, exchanging
Mhm.
seawater quite regularly. So you don't have this nice sealed away. When our stomach is digesting, there's a sphincter, a muscular opening is what a sphincter is, since I didn't explain it earlier, at each end. So it is a closed bag.
Mhm.
And that lets you do all sorts of fancy chemistry because you're not having to worry about outside elements coming and interrupting you or letting that chemistry out. They can't do that as efficiently. So what they do, and this was discovered by freezing some anemones that had just been fed and dissecting them to see what was happening,
Oh,
they
interesting.
have some filaments, some little tentacles inside their body that are similar to the tentacles outside their body. Anemones are cousins of jellies and hydras, the cnidarians, which have nematocysts on their tentacles, little stinging cells that act like harpoons and fishing lines at the same time as they stab in and inject venom into prey. These filaments, called acantia, are little filaments, little tentacles inside the body that also have nematocysts. And they found that they had entered through the wall of the stomach and wrapped around the fish, injecting them and stinging them with their nematocysts, and found that they were releasing at least 5 different digestive enzymes into the fish.
Oh, interesting.
So they have a direct contact digestive process inside their stomach with digestive tentacles delivering
Yeah.
directly to the food enzymes.
It's such a cool demonstration of how variable this gets,
Yes.
right? And these are echinoderms, which is among the closest relatives to vertebrates. So
Yep.
we're still in pretty like far down the evolutionary line towards us. And
Yes.
insects are pretty similar to us, but there's so much variety in the structure of the digestive system, what functions it has to do. Also, as you pointed out, the digestive system is such a major component of an animal's body that
Mhm.
not only is it intimately tied to almost everything else that the body does, but that's a lot of space for dual functions
Yep. 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 Yep.
where you have, we mentioned birds before, but alligators, crocodilians
Mhm.
also swallow rocks,
Mhm.
partly to help with digestion, but then they also use them to assist with like buoyancy and stuff.
Yes.
You're
Yeah.
doubling up what the different parts of the body are doing. Also, since we've mentioned alligators a couple times so far, I do want to point out snakes are really the thing that they are particularly famous for. is what you were talking about before, where like our digestive system can activate and deactivate as needed.
Yeah.
Snakes famously can kind of shut off their digestive system.
Yep.
And like there are, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but like the organs all just shrink down dramatically. The blood flow and activity goes down to about as close to zero as you can reasonably get. And then when they get their first meal in a while, it's just a whole system of the body that turns back on. The organs blow back up, the activities kick in again. They just shut down that wing of the factory and then open it back up again when they need to.
Which is such a cool survival mechanism. And this came up in the news about them also about how they eat meals, of them being able to just go long irregular periods
Yes.
between meals.
Mm-hmm. And this is an adaptation for that. Being
Yes,
able to,
exactly.
at will, flip the digestive system on or off again.
And the joke that brought to mind, which reminded me of a thing I forgot to say, was that, well, you can't be hungry when you effectively don't have a stomach or digestive system. But yeah, actually, that is another important part of like controlling the system is hunger. The nerves that we have in our system are going to monitor things and let you know when you need to be hungry based off of what's going on. But also, this is where the drooling upon seeing food comes from, is when you view food, your brain goes, we would love to eat that. So let's get ready. Turn on the salivary glands to start moistening that food, put it in my mouth now.
Yes.
So like drooling over food is a real biological response. And we see it in other animals, dogs and other things, but things like seeing food and then going, cool, start warming up the stomach because
Yes.
I'm planning to capture this mouse.
Because in the factory, someone's sitting up in the control room and they spot food in the distance and they slam the big red button and they say, there's food coming.
We got a live one.
To your stations, everybody.
Yes.
Well, and the other thing that I wanted to bring up, because you were talking about the dichotomy between one way and two-way digestive systems. We are one way, it goes from beginning to end. Two-way, like hydras are the example that comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
In and out the same tube or the same entrance. But as we alluded to earlier, there are lots of animals that do both.
Yes, that are bidirectional.
Very famously, like birds of prey, right?
Yeah.
Owls who eat a bunch of food, make a little pellet, and spit that pellet back out. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, they still poop, don't they?
They're still going to have waste material, but they get rid of a bulk of the waste material up front instead of having to poop bones and fur that they won't be able to digest.
This is also the case with egg-eating snakes, where they will swallow the egg, break it, spit the shell back out of the mouth, and then digest what's left and poop out waste on the other end. So you do end up getting waste coming out both sides of the digestive tract in those examples.
Which is an efficiency angle, and we'll talk more about that later on, which leads us to our mid-episode break, after which we will discuss some non-animal digestion and the evolutionary and fossil history. Stay tuned. So as we alluded to, digestion is a pretty common feature of life. At least the processing of nutrients is a common feature to life, which means there's a bunch of examples of digestion that are outside the animal kingdom. Some that are very clearly digestion, and then some that are weird but technically digestion. One of the obvious ones we cited way up front are amoebas. Amoebas are a really easy way to visualize single-cell digestion. They feed via something called phagocytosis, which is when a cell takes something into their own cell membrane by engulfing it. Typically, the way cells get stuff inside their body is either through transferring something across the cell membrane with like ion channels and things like that, ports in the cell wall or cell membrane that allow things to pass in, or with phagocytosis, where they engulf, surround something, and then merge their cell membrane back around it and engulf it into their cytoplasm, their goo inside. Amoebas use pseudopods, which are extensions of their, I was going to say body, but their cell.
Yep.
Typically, they're engulfing particles of food or small prey organisms, which are other single-celled organisms typically. They do not have a mouth. They do not have a front. They can engulf food from any point on their cell. So any spot could become a site of feeding.
Any place could become a mouth.
Exactly. This is the common way most of them feed. There are some that get fancy with the way that they can use this technique. There's a group of amoebas called vampirellid amoebas, and these eat, like dissolve and break into the cell walls of algae and then slurp up the insides, leaving behind a hollowed out cell wall.
Wow, like a microscopic sea star.
Yep. Yep. And there's even one that takes it a step further in being weird, because most of them, that's what they do. And I saw a video of one time, and they just come up to like a little chain of algae cells, connect to one, slurp up the inside, and you just watch it get hollowed out and become a clear box. And then they tumbleweed over to the next one and slurp up its contents and just move down the line. They found one that is named Strigomixa ruptor.
My favorite character from Rugrats.
Right? I am Ruptor. Hear me roar. I am Ruptor, the vampiric amoeba.
Turns your tongue green.
They engulf parts of algae cells or single algae cells and then suck out the insides inside a cavity within the amoeba and then discard the remains.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. Which, as the researchers pointed out, is very similar to those birds of prey we were just talking about.
Yes. That's so, and you know, thinking about single cell digestion is really fascinating because that is the oldest form of digestion, right?
Absolutely.
We're thinking about this from an evolutionary perspective. That's how a single cell does it. But those kinds of processes and behaviors are not unique to single-celled organisms.
Mm-hmm.
For example, that process of engulfing prey and digesting it is how our white blood cells attack pathogens in our immune system.
Absolutely.
That process of digestion, our immune system has co-opted that as a defensive tactic to protect our body.
That actually is a suggested connection between digestion and our immune system.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, that ability started as digestive process and then has transferred to being used as an immune process. We see in some invertebrates cells that are called phagocytes, which is a situation where they are digesting by letting individual cells do the amoeba job.
Yeah.
Instead of dumping acids and enzymes into a vat like our stomach, they are doing it cell by cell and digesting that way. And when we look at phagocytes and our macrophages, which are our white blood cells, we see a lot of similarities in the two. They develop from different parts of the germ layer, but it may mean that they go back to an ancestral time when developmentally our cells were less differentiated. But it does seem like there is a connection between the digestive cells used by some inverts and some other animals that are engulfing food particles and our immune cells.
Between our actual gastrointestinal tract, our microbes that live within our gastrointestinal tract, our own immune system, and the process by which our cells recycle themselves and each other, plus all of our various endo and ectoparasites, there's so much digestion happening in your body. Just your body is just rife with digestion.
Oh yeah. Well, and like, because macrophages are important during development for like laying down like cellular matrices and like important stuff, but also eating the dead cells that are left over from development. So like eating up the dead tissue and materials. Something's got to get rid of dead cells when they are dying in our body. And It's going to be through phagocytosis.
We digest them. And
Yep.
and I believe that is just a thing that continues happening throughout our lives.
Yeah,
Where
absolutely.
like some of the, like skin cells are just shed, right? And they're, off into the environment for something else to digest. But a lot of the stuff in our body, when a cell is dying or breaking down, we don't want to waste all that material. And so our body digests it,
Yeah.
reabsorbs it, puts it back in the bloodstream, repurposes it.
So like, our white blood cells effectively are just amoebas with a medical degree that are doing the same process they would be, but for the common good of our body.
Yeah, there are amoebas that are on our side.
Yes, exactly. And we even see in some inverts with the phagocytes that are digesting that they can transition into a mobile phase. So they can become
On the hunt.
effectively internal amoebas for digestion for some of these animals.
Yeah, they're little internal predators.
Yes. So that's definitely where digestion got its start, was with things like that. While we're on the note of non-animal examples, this is definitely not about the evolution of digestion in us, because it is very separate. Carnivorous plants.
Yes. Divergent directions of digestion.
Carnivorous plants are having to do the exact same steps of digestion that we are. All plants have to take up nutrients and have to break down the nutrients, but most of them are not taking in food. They're absorbing nutrients from the soil. They're still going to process it. Like, they will release enzymes and acids into the soil to break down molecules so they can be taken up by the roots. So they are still digesting, and it's external digestion, but it's a pretty simple in the fact that it's release chemicals, absorb nutrients. They don't have specialized structures the same way, even though, like, from what I've heard, the chemical cocktail can be very complex.
Yeah, but plants aren't eating the way that we think of in a lot of other organisms.
Carnivorous plants, though, are. They're having to capture insects and then break that insect down and get its nutrients.
Episode 105.
So we won't go into a ton of detail because we talked about them there. Carnivorous plants are typically doing this because they live in low nutrient environments, and the best source of nutrients are bugs, but bugs are actually not very easy to break down.
No.
They are tough little nuggets of nutrients.
They're made of chitin and stuff.
Yeah. So the carnivorous plants have to employ some complex and specialized digestive processes. Now, basically all carnivorous plants use some form of a trap leaf. Now, this could be a pitcher plant, or it could be the Venus flytrap, but some form of a leaf specialized for trapping prey. And when we look at these leaves, they often bear specialized glands that do a number of different jobs, secreting mucus and stuff, but also for pitcher plants, the fluid, and secreting acids and digestive enzymes. And when we look at what they're producing, it's often very similar. The main acid that is produced by most of these plants is hydrochloric acid, which, as you may know, and we didn't mention earlier because I was saving it for here, is what we produce. That's our stomach acid.
HCl.
So they are using the same stomach acid, or at least main acid, as their digestive tool as we are. And we also see a lot of similar patterns. Our stomach being acidic is good for digestion. It's also good for, like, immune system of, if we eat something that's got germs on it, well, we're going to throw you into a vat of acid. And anyone who's followed Acquisitions Incorporated knows that that's not good.
Not where you want to be.
No. And so it's good for that, but it also is important because the acidic conditions of our stomach help activate the enzymes. The enzymes function better in an acidic environment to do digestive. So it's also making the process of digestion more efficient. Now, the acidic situation in the plants is less acidic than us, which, makes sense, but is evidently, on average, more acidic than a lot of insect-eating animals.
Interesting.
So they are quite specialized when compared to other dedicated insect eaters.
Yeah. Well, I mean, other dedicated insect eaters are also going to be doing a lot of crushing and other processing.
So they are up there as far as the acidic situation. And they noted that a lot of the inside enzymes going on inside these plants also seem to be activated by an acidic situation. So,
Hmm.
in many ways, the inside of a pitcher plant is very, very comparable to the inside of our own stomach.
Yeah. Well, in this, we're sort of exploring the diversity and thinking about the shared ancestry of all of this digestive process. We're all of us, right? The Earth's children, living organisms, we're all made of the same stuff,
Yep.
right? It varies here and there, but like generally speaking, we're made of the same stuff. We're made of the same kinds of stuff. And so it's not a surprise that different lineages of life have developed very similar chemical strategies for breaking that stuff down.
Yes. Now, there are, of course, differences. The main one being they don't have multiple parts to their digestive system.
Right.
Much like the anemone, it's just the leaf. They don't have tubes leading elsewhere. There is one, the corkscrew plants, which do have in their trap, I think they're at least underground. Their trap structures do have multiple sections and chambers,
Hmm.
but basically everyone else is doing it all in one spot, which once again means it's having to do all the steps. They also are doing it differently because they aren't distributing the nutrients through, a blood system like us, like blood vessels. They are delivering it directly to the cells.
Yeah.
So their nutrients are going to be either transported through the membrane or using endocytosis, which is another form of bringing things into the cell. So they don't have a delivery system the same way as us, or like organs to store nutrients the same way, typically. And they also noted that, much like how you said, throughout our whole body, digestion is having to happen to maintain the health of our body, to fight disease. A lot of the glands that we see in carnivorous plants are same glands we see in non-carnivorous plants producing similar chemicals, and in their case it's often from the opposite direction of immune functions and defensive
Yes.
functions, because a lot of the things plants are fighting against, like microbes, fungi, and both parasitic and herbivorous insects, are all often made out of chitin.
They're all made of the same stuff.
Yep. So being
And
able to attack chitin is good for defense. And then if you can co-opt that into a digestive juice, that's great.
yes, this has come up when we talk about venom, right? We
Mm-hmm.
did episode 97 where venoms and poisons are often a very similar situation where like
Yes.
snake venom, a bunch of what's in snake venom is digestive enzymes and the kinds of enzymes and molecules that break down body processes and body tissues, because the ability to dissolve the body of a living organism is extremely useful. It's
Yes.
useful in all sorts of different, that is a multi-purpose skill.
Yeah, it's just a good tool to have because it helps both inside the body, but also it's that old adage of, yeah, I'd prefer to have a way to defend myself and not need to use it than need one and not have it. Like, yeah, if you can have a way to digest someone that's bothering you or when you're hungry, boy, it sure does come in handy in those situations. As we move up the scale of complexity a bit, coming back to animals, but still real simple digestion and a very different digestion than we see in basically anyone else we've mentioned, are things like placozoa and sponges,
Mhm.
some of the most simple animals around. Placozoa are way down at toward the base of animals. They are technically animals, they are invertebrates, but I found multiple things that were very, very like made a point to describe them as blob-like, an aggregation of cells, lack a well-defined body plan, no mouth, no back, no nerve cells. It is just this little flattened blob of cells.
An ooze.
Yeah, they move around on the seafloor and reproduce by budding and splitting. One of them quoted that they have been described as the simplest animals on earth, of just super, super basic, but technically an animal. And they eat by engulfment, kind of similar to an amoebas. These are also very tiny, like 1 millimeter.
Mhm.
So they're quite similar to amoebas, but they have their lower surface is somewhat concave, has a little pocket, just slightly, and they will creep over food bits and then digest it between them and the surface. So they enclose it, but they're not bringing it into the body. They are just squishing it between the ground and release their enzymes, release their stuff, and then slurp it all up.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this is external digestion, but you are covering it with your body. So it's got that kind of one step closer to internal digestion. And then sponges also have they also have a fairly simple form of digestion compared to what we think of, but they can get complex with how diverse this feeding system is.
Mm-hmm.
Sponges, porifera, are filter feeders. They are immobile, they can't move, and they use ciliated, so hair-like cells with little flagella to create water currents to pull water into their comb, open body and filter out food particles from the water. Different groups have different body plans for this filtration. Some are very simple. They have pores to pull water in, a big central cavity, and it's lined with a bunch of flagellated, filamented cells called choanocytes or collar cells. These are the feeding structures. They're the ones grabbing the food, bringing it in, and processing it. But some of them will have multiple chambers that can start to funnel it into more concentrated areas or increase surface area. Some of them have channels connecting these chambers. So they're starting to get this kind of multi-sectioned. It's not a path per se, but they are having delineation, separation of their digestive process. Some of them having structures to their chambers that also can like adjust the flow of things to slow down food to maybe more effectively catch it. So they can start getting quite complex in the way they're filtering food, from just a bowl to a pretty complicated flow system to move the water through these specialized chambers.
Yeah.
Like we were mentioning before, they are doing the digestion mostly within cells. So they are not digesting them inside the chamber. They're picking the food particles up with their collar cells and then digesting inside cells like a single celled organism, just across this multicellular organism. There are also, and I had forgotten this, carnivorous sponges.
Yes.
And those will catch food. They're often very weirdly shaped. The harp sponge is an example of a carnivorous sponge. They've got these long branches that come up, and they have this Velcro-like hook structure on the outside that will grab onto little crustaceans, little ostracods and things like that. So they aren't filter feeding using the flow of the water the same way. They're catching, they're a net now. And they use phagocytic cells to take down the prey. So instead of bringing food particles into each cell and digesting, they have a group of mobile cells that migrate along the sponge toward the captured prey and digest it. And then the surrounding sponge cells soak up the nutrients broken down by these cells. And from what the description described, the cells are just kind of doing their own thing. They're not being directed by the sponge. They're not being produced by they are basically a group of amoebas that travel around the sponge, digesting whatever gets caught on it. Yeah. And then they just soak up the results. So as we often like to note that while these examples we've gone through are not the evolutionary steps, it didn't go amoeba, placozoa, sponge, and then anemone, sea star, so on. But when we look at these different groups, we can see, kind of like when we talked about the evolution of the eye, we can see the different stages at which you could view our digestive system having gone through to evolve.
Yeah, this is one of those really cool situations where you look at single cell digestive processes and then you look at our full digestive system, and they seem wildly separate and divergent from each other. But when we look at all of these other examples, you see what intermediates are possible, right? Where
Yes.
you have an organism where individual cells are doing digesting, but they make up a multicellular organism. You have pitcher plants that just form a little vat of acid that they dissolve stuff and then absorb nutrients directly into the cell. You can construct pretty easily a speculative hypothetical path of how you can go from amoeba digestion to full gastrointestinal tract.
Exactly. Like amoebas start by engulfing phagocytosis. Placozoa are also using phagocytosis, but they're surrounding the food against a substrate with their
Hmm.
body. Sponges are still using that, but now they formed a body cavity to do this process within. Chambers, cnidarians, and their related groups also are using a chamber, and they've also formed their phagocytes into an internal lining instead of
Hmm.
free moving or just an individual. They are now a tissue. And then eventually you can get to, instead of doing the digestion within the cells, they're producing the materials to do the digestion because they have to
Right.
produce those materials inside themselves anyway. Now, if we just are glands instead of phagocytes, we can produce them into the cavity, and then
Yes.
you can end up with the vertebrate digestive system.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned like the sea stars, I think it was, or some one of the examples of just a
Hmm.
bag, but then
Yes.
some of them, the bag has little divisions to it.
Yes,
Like,
exactly.
yes, you
Yep.
have a left bag and a right bag, and you're
Yep.
starting to differentiate the different functions. So, yeah, it's a pretty this is one that is actually ends up being pretty easy to see
Yes.
how you develop further and further complexity in this system.
Yeah, because like we mentioned, when you look at an amoeba, it looks very different until you zoom in on our cells and other animal cells and go, actually, that's just an amoeba that lives here, and
Yep.
it's doing the same thing. Because yeah, when you break it down, digestion is quite simple.
And as we have said many times before, and as I always love to remind us, the ability to break down the ingredients of our own bodies is an essential function because we need to be able to break down our own bodies.
Yes,
Like every
exactly.
cell, that's what our cells are doing, right? When our DNA is replicated, our cells are full of enzymes whose job it is to break apart proteins and genetic molecules and put them back together, which means that just by existing as a cell, you have the tools to break down a cell.
Yes.
That's built in, that comes with the program. And so the ability to digest other things is actually a pretty simple step.
Yeah. Well, it's like a hammer needs to be able to remove nails when you put them in wrong, but that means that I can build something with a hammer and then I can take it apart with that hammer.
Yeah.
I that hammer is both construction and deconstruction tool in one because it has to be, or else it's a bad, at least for woodworking, it's a bad nail hammer if I
Yes.
can't undo what I've done. Now, let's discuss a bit about how can we look at the direct evidence of the evolution of digestion. A lot of the research is going to be genetics, comparing molecular features of digestive systems, of the microbiome, of all that kind of stuff. But when we want to know more about the digestive tract, we look to the fossil record, and we do have fossil evidence of digestive systems.
Yeah.
They're not common, of course, because it is soft tissue. And especially for things like mammals, dinosaurs, big animals like that, it's also very rare that if anything does preserve, you're going to get the entire tract.
Hmm.
For us, that's 30 feet of tubing. So you're going to usually get snapshots, you're going to get parts, you're going to get pieces. But we do get examples. Extremely well preserved specimens that preserve soft tissue absolutely can preserve internal organs.
Hmm.
It's not common. It does happen. It's more common in situations like the Burgess Shale and other fossil sites like that, where you have compression and carbonized outlines of all of the internal structures of these soft bodied organisms. And you'll often see this black little passage through the body, which is their intestines. You also get things like frozen specimens, mammoths, rhinos, things like that, that have been
Hmm.
frozen in permafrost. And if you've got the whole frozen body, then probably there's some guts in there.
And we have plenty of cool examples. One came up in the news recently of it was an ancient wolf of some kind that
Mm-hmm.
had a chunk of rhino in its stomach that the
Yes.
researchers were able to genetically sequence.
Yes. And like we've done things with frozen baby mammoths and looked at the plant material that was already in their stomach at pretty young
Hmm.
and been able to get ideas of the environment around them and things like that. So that's a cool source. The most common, though, are going to be stomach contents. So things that seem like they were swallowed by the animal and are shown to either be in the body cavity or sometimes within preserved digestive tracts, where we
Hmm.
have both, and then coprolites and
Yes.
regurgilites.
Poops and vomits.
Yep. And those are going to give us an idea of what they digested and sometimes about the kind of digestion that happened based on
Yeah.
the features of the poop.
How did it get digested? What
Yeah.
happened to you while you were on the inside?
There are some cool examples that we found and that have also given us insights into more info on the animal. We talked about the Ediacaran biota a while back in the podcast now.
Episode 31.
This is a group of pre-Cambrian, so right before the Cambrian and the Cambrian explosion, organisms that have been debated, and nowadays it seems more and more likely many of them are animals, but they were these weird soft-bodied organisms, some of which it was not able to be confirmed whether or not they were animals or some other form of life. And so many of them, it's been questioned of, okay, cool, do you have a digestive tract?
Hmm.
Or were you just absorbing stuff from the water because you're not actually an animal, you're a giant amoeba or something? Like, we weren't sure. We now, with really well preserved fossils, have been able to find evidence of digestive tracts, of guts in some of them. Kimberella, which is a famous kind of sluggy like organism, we have found specimens with fossilized gut, feeding traces associated with them, and maybe potential coprolites. So evidence
Hmm.
of a digestive system that we would recognize as an animal kind of digestive system before the Cambrian.
Yeah, one of the earliest known potential digestive tracts in the fossil record.
Yes. There's also some of these like tube worm looking organisms. Caliptrina is one of these. And for a long time, they weren't sure if they would have a gut or whether they were just filter feeding from the water. But looking at them and looking at biomarkers show that they have a very tube worm like system inside, and that both Caliptrina and Kimberella seem to have guts that shared a diet of green algae and bacteria.
Very cool.
Yep. But then we have some others like Dickinsonia, arguably the most famous Ediacaran organism, that there has been evidence that it's an animal, but has no traces of any dietary molecules when they looked at these
Mhm.
biomarkers, which could mean that it was feeding more like a placozoa.
Yeah, that the digestion was happening outside of the
Yeah.
actual body.
And each cell was doing a thing. They didn't have a digestive chamber.
Yeah.
So we might have had a diversity during the Eacrin, but it seems like already digestion on a animal scale was happening pre-Cambrian. Another early cool example is we have fossilized guts of trilobites and like stomach content and feeding traces of trilobites. For at least one Bohemolycus, they have a basically three-dimensionally preserved digestive tract pretty much fully, and it's full of shell material from what they've been eating.
Yeah.
So we get information on what they were eating, lots of little small crustacean-like and arthropod-like creatures, but we can also tell things about the digestive system this way. The lack of dissolution of the cells implies a neutral or alkaline environment within the digestive tract, so not super acidic. And they said that's would support them having similar digestive enzymes to modern crustaceans and chelicerates, which are like horseshoe crabs.
Yeah. So we can get insights into the chemical conditions of
Yes.
ancient digestive systems.
And based off of the grouping of the shells, it also seems that they had a crop, a
Oh, yeah.
extra chamber to the stomach that was for storage or processing. And that this is another thing that we see in things like some crabs and the horseshoe crab that have a crop-like section, and that some of them use it as a muscular processing organ, what we often call a gastric mill, a
Mhm.
intestinal grinding area to help process their tough shelled food.
Yeah, and I believe similar things have been found in some fossil birds,
Yes,
where we've got
indeed.
this like, here's a little collection of tough material and rocks and stuff that appears to be their ancient crop inside the bird.
Exactly. Because, yeah, birds have very specialized digestive tract, which leads us perfectly into discussing them. They often have a crop, which is an expansion of the esophagus. So, this is a pouch that they
Mhm.
use to store food where they can grab extra food than what they can eat right now. It's also where they can store extra food for like their young. It's also where some of them produce crop milk from, which we talked about in the milk episode.
Episode 170.
And these vary. Some have very simple crops, like fish eating birds, that just is a part that can expand to hold a fish. Others have very distinct specialized crops, things like the Houtson that are using that as part of the digestion. Most of your predatory birds have little to no crop because they
Mhm.
aren't storing food the same way. They also tend to have a two-section stomach with a muscular and a glandular section. The muscular section is up front and is often called the gizzard and is full of grit and stone and bits of sand to grind up food. And then the glandular stomach is doing the same job our stomach is doing. They also have a bit of bidirectional peristalsis in that they can move food back and forth. Now, they aren't bringing it up to chew the cud like a cow does, but they are moving food from the small intestine back to the stomach. This is doing a similar thing of bringing it back and hoping it's a bit easier to process. And they noted that for birds, this is an important adaptation because it basically allows them to get the benefits of a longer digestive tract by reusing sections without adding the weight of a long digestive system.
Yeah.
So they can cheat by treating their short digestive system as a longer one by reversing direction every now and then. This feature also is important for producing pellets, like we mentioned. Getting rid of that waste material, you need this ability to bring stuff back up to the gizzard where it can be crushed into a pellet and then thrown up. And we have evidence of a bunch of these in the fossil record, both from fossil birds, where we'll find a collection of grit near the top of the stomach or the top of the chest body cavity where the gizzard would be, but also from non-bird dinosaurs. Troodontids, Anchiornis has been noted with pellets associated with them and some even with the skeleton. That seems that they had the ability to form pellets mostly of lizard bones and fish scales,
Mhm.
which suggests that they had a gizzard and makes them the earliest and most basal theropod known to produce pellets. We also have evidence of a gastric mill in other dinosaurs via presence of stones. Psittacosaurus, the ceratopsian horned dinosaur cousin. We've got ornithopods that have been found with this, ceratosaurs, ornithomimosaurs, and oviraptorosaurs. All have had at least a member, if not more, found with evidence of stones, gastroliths inside them, suggesting based on the clustering that they had some sort of gizzard, some sort of gastric mill. We even have some evidence of that in pterosaurs. So it seems like this might have been an archosaur feature going back quite a way. And then on the flip side, when we see things like tyrannosaurids with their stomach content and their coprolite showing bone material acid etched and incorporated into the coprolite suggests they were not producing pellets.
Mhm.
Now, whether this meant they didn't have a gizzard of any sort is harder to say, but they at least were not using that style of digestion that we see in modern birds. So we actually have a lot of really cool examples of insights into how bird-like dinosaur digestion was.
Mhm.
I also found one study that was looking into herbivorous dinosaurs and the plants they would be eating and how digestible the plants would be, because it's been long thought that the ancient plants would be harder to digest and therefore not very nutritious and, kind of in line with them being lumbering big dumb animals eating
Mhm.
dumb plants and just everything was worse back then. they ran a test called the Hohenheim gas test, which uses gastric juices of livestock to ferment plants and look at how digestible they would be in similar situations in a rumen like situation, and found that the modern day cousins of a lot of Jurassic, I think they were focusing on, plants were very digestible, and some of them as digestible and nutritious as grasses. And
Cool.
so these herbivores were probably had just as nutritionally available food as our modern day herbivores.
Yeah, it's really cool that we get evidence from, like, preserved soft tissues that can tell us about the structure of the internal organs. We've got gut contents that can give us a picture of how things were being processed, and coprolites, which things were making it through and what was happening to them. And then studies like this about the digestibility of the foods, and all of these together mean that we can put together a pretty good picture of what a dinosaur's digestive system would have looked like, which is very cool.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
A thing that we can't see, but we've got evidence from half a dozen different directions that we can put together the picture.
Absolutely. Digestion in the fossil record is definitely one of those where we're having to find all the clues from as many angles as we can.
Mhm.
Because, yeah, we're not likely to get a nice, pristine digestive tract full of fossilized biomarkers from the microbes.
Right. We're not going to get a frozen tyrannosaur.
No. So we have to work with what we got. The last avenue that can come up when looking at digestion in the fossil record is a thing we haven't mentioned much, mostly because it's not actually about digestion, but it is part of the digestive system, is parasites.
Yep. A really important and influential piece of the digestive tract.
Yep. Animal digestive tracts are full of parasites, eaten on the nutrients from within our digestive system.
Our deepest apologies to all of the animals listening to this podcast.
Yep.
You're full of parasites.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, it's not your fault. It just is.
You just live here.
Yep. And they live there too. This is going to include things like tapeworms, flukes, nematodes, roundworms,
Mhm.
and thorny headed worms are all very common gastrointestinal parasites. Most of these do not fossilize well because they are soft bodied worms inside soft tissue of animals.
They're also living inside, like, vats of acid.
Yep.
So once everything stops working properly, they're not going to be around very long.
And even if they do preserve within a preserved intestine, unless you look inside it for them, you're not going to see them because they're inside it. So
Yep.
they are really hard to detect the actual animal. What they do leave behind, all of those, is they produce eggs that then are released within the poop of their host. That's
Yep.
how they can get spread. And their eggs are super, super tough because they've got to make through the rest of the digestive tract and survive long enough to be eaten by another host. And those we will find in fossilized coprolites. We found them in shark poop, dinosaur poop, crocodile
Mhm.
poop, cynodont poop, all sorts of different groups that have been riddled with worms.
Yeah, I know that. I'm pretty sure that came up in episode 30, our coprolites episode, and for sure came up in episode 102, which was our parasites episode.
Yep, indeed. There are also examples where they do inform us about the digestion of the animal, because usually it just tells you they had parasites
Mhm.
and that's it. But some parasites are very specific to the kind of host they live in. So if you find that parasite in that animal's poop, it suggests what kind of digestive system they would have been living in. Pinworms are a type of nematode. They are hindgut parasites. So they are down in the large intestine or lower intestine of many inverts and vertebrates. And specifically, they usually are using hosts that are hindgut fermenters because they eat the bacteria that are doing the fermenting.
Okay.
So if you find them in some animal's poop, suggests most likely that they were doing some plant eating and fermenting it in the back of their digestive system.
Interesting.
And a cool example of that is there was a therapsid cynodont from the Middle Triassic, whose coprolites they found eggs of this nematode, of this pinworm in it. The poop is cylindrical, it's a tube shaped, which typically would make them consider that this was a carnivorous or omnivorous therapsid.
Sure.
But the presence of pinworms suggests maybe we should consider more heavily that it was herbivorous.
Neat.
Yeah.
That's a very cool, we talk a bunch about, we'll look at a vertebrate fossil, and based on the features of that fossil, we can infer things about its habitat. This is the same thing, but the habitat was the gut of some bigger animal.
Yep.
Cool.
It's very cool.
Creepy.
The last example, just since we've mentioned pellets so many times, we also will find parasite eggs inside raptor pellets.
Oh, yeah. Raptors, birds of prey.
Birds of prey. But because the digestive process before making a pellet usually does not make it very far within the bird's digestive tract, these are most likely not the bird's parasites, but the rodent's parasites.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. Because, as I mentioned, it's just digestion all the way down.
Yep.
Everything. There's tons of digestion.
Yeah. When an animal eats another animal, there are two digestive tracts within the first animal for a little while.
And for a lot of the cases, they're both active for a little bit.
Yep. And well, this is why you have to be careful about like eating fish randomly and eating, because like if we just eat another animal, they're full of parasites, and when we digest the things around those parasites, if those parasites were already surviving a digestive system, our digestive system might not be able to kill them. So they might just go, cool, new stomach, who dis?
Bigger.
And
so look, we've upgraded.
Yep, this is great. So yeah, it's very easy for that to happen.
Very cool. And this is one of those topics that thankfully has come up a bunch in other episodes of the podcast. It comes up in the news a bunch, where there's so many ways for us to get insights into the internal processes of ancient species.
It's very cool. There's a ton more that could be said. So like, as always, let us know what your favorite example is, but also if there's a specific thing, specific version, specific organ, send in the requests, because this is so many moving parts and so many different kinds of examples we'll be giving that we of course had to skip a ton.
Yes.
Before we wrap up fully, we have one last section, which is our patron question. Every episode, we like to answer one of the questions submitted to us by our patrons, which, if you sign up at certain levels, you can send to us through Patreon. David, what's our question?
This episode's question comes from James, who asks, given that some ecosystems almost never preserve, like mountains and rainforests, what are some weird species that you think might have evolved in them that we will never find out about?
This feels thematically fitting.
Yeah, I was just going to say stomachs. Stomachs and intestines are a habitat where we're rarely going to find what was living inside them.
Yeah. And when like there's going to be a whole bunch of parasites, like not every parasite is going to produce really convenient little egg cases that you can find. So there might be some ancient parasites that we're never going to know about because they were so soft-bodied and the way they were transmitted was not via those eggs. That was one thing they mentioned about those pinworms as well, is that they're usually transmitted through social grooming. So it also can suggest behavior. So unless we've got features like that, stuff inside an intestine is going to be hard to always find. The other thing that I thought of is very likely, some of the environments that James mentioned, like mountains, rainforests, deep sea, and ocean floor type stuff. When those environments coincide with an organism that doesn't fossil well, like I'm sure there's a whole bunch of birds that are mountaintop specialists. I'm sure there were pterosaurs that were mountaintop specialists that we will just never know about because that's a delicate animal in a harsh environment. So it's just, there's probably no chance that we're ever going to get a look at some of those that were mountain peak specialists.
Yeah, well, and we get things today like hydrothermal vent ecosystems. And there are fossil sites that are ancient hydrothermal vents, but most of those are not fossilizing because they're just not a very convenient space for fossilization. We think about our deep sea fish today, where we've got
Mhm.
all these cool, bizarre fish down there. And it's very tempting to think that deep sea fish back in the Mesozoic were similar to our modern deep sea fish. And they might very well have been, but they also
Mhm.
might very well have not been.
Yep.
We were talking about this on a Discord Q&A recently about tree sloths. Right, that tree sloths live in one very specific region of the world. They are, as far as I know, we don't have a fossil record of them.
Yeah.
So we don't know if there were cool, weird offshoots of tree sloths or like viper fish, those cool deep sea fish.
Yeah.
These are lineages and ecosystems that might have changed a lot over time
Mhm.
or might have developed unusual differences over time that we're just never going to know about because we don't
Yeah.
get those kinds of fossils.
Also, they're going to have cases where we do have like islands, where we have
Mhm.
lots of island fossil records, sometimes on islands like Madagascar that are still around, and then other times that were islands and have since eroded or receded back into the water due to the movement of stuff, but the deposit has remained. But you're going to get examples where, yeah, this volcanic island came up, had a bunch of really weird island species on it, and then the volcano died, so it stopped
Mhm.
building and it eroded away to nothing. And every fossil that might have fossilized was turned back into sand. And
Yes.
we will never know those. And with an island, that could be a whole group of all new species because it's an island.
Yeah.
So surely we have lost whole island communities to the fossil record that we'll just never know about. Some we
Yep.
will, some we won't.
And on a similar note, caves.
Yes. Yep.
Right. As we discussed in episode 112, for the most part, we don't get evidence of caves more than a few million years old, just because they tend
Mhm.
not to survive geologically. They get filled in or they get eroded or whatnot. So, yeah, there were a bunch of really cool cave fish and cave
Mhm.
amphibians, possibly even like were there cave temnospondals
Yes, exactly who I was thinking of.
back in the Permian, creeping around in caves. Yeah, we don't know.
Yeah.
And we probably will never find that.
Well, and even if we do someday find the lone cave that got infilled just right
Hmm.
to fossilize stuff, that would be one example. Because caves,
Yes.
much like islands, this cave here has this fish species. This cave 5 miles away has a different species because they aren't connected and they're effectively little islands underground.
Yes.
So yeah, we have there are definitely uncountable species that are for sure lost to the fossil record just because they were so specialized, so niche in where they were living. And yeah, the diversity of what could have been lost there is the exact same diversity we see in those kind of environments today,
Yeah.
where you can get, yeah, this entire species is found in this one cave and there's no example like them quite anywhere else on Earth. Yep, that was happening back then too, and we might have lost that one.
So paleo artists do some hypothetical reconstructions and then post them on the Discord.
Go crazy. With that, we can wrap up this episode. Digestion is, like I said, a simple concept, huge topic.
Yes. If you are excited about this kind of episode, there are a bunch of other episodes that we've done. We were just talking about parasites, episode 102. We've done a bunch of internal systems
Yes.
episodes. We did brains in episode 121. We did lungs in episode 218. We did tongues, which is pretty
Mhm.
related to this. That was episode 192. And teeth, episode 88. So there's all sorts of other sort of digestive system related episodes out there.
Absolutely. We did coprolites.
Yep, episode 30.
So yeah, we got a whole bunch that relate to that. I had that feeling while going through it and being like, we've already kind of talked about this, but it's been a while.
Yes.
So let's mention it. As always, let us know your thoughts, your favorite examples. If there's things you want to hear that we didn't say, request it. If you're wanting more info, check out the blog post. There'll be links and pictures and extra sources for you to follow up on this topic. Keep an ear out for the next episode of Silver Screen Science all this month, and our museum meetup coming up soon.
Yes, April 18th. Be there in Knoxville, Tennessee, if you can.
Thank you, as always, to everyone who requested this topic and to our newest patrons. And an extra tippy top special thanks to our top tier patrons, Jeff Ellington, Sarah May, and Danielle Loves Bugs.
Thank you, everybody, as always.
This was an episode that happens every now and then with different topics where, while taking notes and while discussing this, it is hard not to start to feel the thing you're talking about of like, man, I'm hungry.
Yeah.
I'm so hungry.
Well, everybody can go eat now. We release episodes every fortnight. So
Every
we'll
fortnight.
have another one. The world is a fascinating place. Lots of cool stuff to learn about. Also, speaking of the world being a fascinating place, if I have my time right, which maybe I do, I think that as we are sitting here recording this, there are 4 human beings farther away from the Earth than any human beings have ever been before.
Yes.
Staring
yes.
at the opposite side of the moon.
It's so cool.
Which is so cool. That
Like-
it's awesome. They're way out. They're so far away. They're so far away.
I saw a post making a point of, I can't remember her name, but one of them being the first woman to get to see the Earth and showing the full disc picture of the Earth.
Yeah.
And it took me a second to go, oh, right. Yeah, because there were no women on those early
just a bunch
missions,
of
and
dudes.
that's the only way to get far enough out to see the entire disk of the planet.
Yeah, I think
So, yeah.
if I remember correctly, the current mission has the first woman in that position, the first black person in general. There is a black
Mhm.
man up there, and I believe the first Canadian.
Ha, yeah,
So
yeah,
we're
I
hitting
remember
all
hearing about
sorts
that,
of
yes.
cool milestones up
That's
there in
awesome.
space. Space is very cool. That's a different podcast. Although,
Yep, yep,
episode 138, the moon. Go check it out. Listen, they're like playing Pink Pony Club up there on the
Yes.
on the spaceship. I can only assume that on the playlist after Pink Pony Club is episode 138 of Common Descent, just to brush up, just to like, you know,
Yes, yeah.
keep the information fresh.
Yeah.
Artemis 2
Ugh.
crew, let us know what you think. Send us your topic requests if you want us to do a follow-up from the moon episode. We got to do a Mars episode.
Yes. Yeah.
To get them all ready.
That's what will get us there.
Don't worry, NASA. We got you.
We're working on it.
We're working on it.
I want Artemis crew, while you're over on the other side, to scope out spots for us to put a radio telescope on the moon, because that was discussed back in one of my astronomy classes, to put a radio telescope on the far side of the moon because it gets it out of the atmosphere and all the radio interference, and that would likely be one of our best telescopes ever, and that would be so cool.
Go do it. Got to find that teapot.
That's my top sci-fi want.
Well, this has been a very short episode of Some Other Podcast. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for this
For Common Ascent.
Common Ascent, which is a podcast where Will and I just geek out about something we really don't know very much about. That's just no expertise really is coming in there. It's just mostly a bunch of stuff that we kind of half understand.
Just us going, "Blah!"
Isn't that cool?
I don't remember who came up with Common Ascent, but it's stuck in my brain. It came up during one of the patron live streams, I think.
Oh yeah.
And it's been stuck in there. I don't know that anything's ever going to happen with it, but boy, I like that name.
Bask and Coil, each with a little astronaut helmet
Mm-hmm.
in space.
Yes. Yep.
Coming someday.
Oh, man. Coil can't spacewalk.
But Coil can make sure that Bask doesn't float away into space while Bask is spacewalking.
He is the tether.
Yes. A 5-foot tether. You're not going very far. All right, let's leave.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Common Descent podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.